Today's tip is an example of why I think beginning woodworkers should start out learning hand tools first. Because just the operation of chisels, hand planes, and hand saws gives you kind of a native feel for what's happening between the blade and the grain of the wood. Now, all of us learn to read wood grain, right? Power tool guys included. I mean, you look at the side of the board, you see that the grain is running kind of like that. So if you were to run it over a jointer to flatten it, you would want to run it this way because it lays the grain fibers down. You do it this way, you get tear out. Same thing with a thickness planer. You look at the grain and how to run it through the machine to get your best results. But wood is not 2D. It is not this way or that way. When was the last time you thought about grain direction this way? So I've got a piece of yellow pine here. Very extreme difference between late growth and early growth. So you can get a lot of tear out if you don't work it properly. I mean, looking at this grain direction. So I'm going to quickly saw or start sawing a dado on it. But looking at that grain direction, which direction would be my most efficient way of sawing it? Which would give me the less tear out and less hang-ups with my saw? If I were to go with the grain leaning this way, if I were to saw straight this way, I'm actually sawing against the grain, entering the saw here. But if I were to saw this way, I would be laying those grain fibers down, so it might cut a little easier and let me cut a little bit more accurately. So let me get a dado started and we'll move on from there. So now I have a choice. Which way do I chisel it out? And this comes down to reading the grain. Looking at the grain right here. I have my chisel, I put it about halfway through, and I whack away. And I can easily plane it with just my hands going in this direction. I mean, it's just a matter of getting rid of the waste between the cuts. Now what happens if I swap it around this way? I come back over, come about halfway, give it a few whacks, and all of a sudden, how much different is the cut? So, here's the grain direction. At first I came in this way, and if you look at this half of the cut, it's actually fairly smooth. Coming this way, there's a little bit of undulation as the grains were popping out. So let's give you an even better example. I'm going to flip my bench hooks over, and let's try it with the router plane. So here's the router plane I used to mark the depth, and I've used a chisel to get rid of the bulk of the waste. So if I come in on this direction, just give it a nice push in, well, it's fighting me on this side. I mean, I kind of have to push it. And obviously I'm not getting a very good result on the end. You can see the tear out. If I come around this way, come off of it, I'm getting a nicer, smoother cut. So I did this half going against the grain and this half going with the grain. And which one's going to have a flatter bottom? Obviously going with the grain. Not bad. Ha. Now, here's the thing I want to talk about next. If you're a power tool user, look at this board. Now, grain direction, grain looks will always take precedent. If you have a better looking board or you're matching stuff up, hey, go for the proper grain direction. What the customer sees is most important. But if it doesn't really matter, it's somewhat same looks, and you're running something over a dado stack to create that same dadoed, look at the grain. If you don't want a lot of blowout as you come out on this side of the board, maybe you might want to consider coming in this way so that the rotation is going with the grain as it exits. Because if you were coming this way into the board and the rotation going that way, you could get blowout right here as it goes with the softer part of the wood. If you had to move the board over the dado blade this way, it might be advantageous to cut the dado on this side of the board as you go over the table. Because once again, you're laying the fibers down instead of pulling them up. And this is just one example, cutting a dado. Now imagine if you're using routers on the creating rabbets or grooves or anything like that, where you might be going across the grain. Well, it makes sense. You've got to read the end grain to figure out the best result, so you're not getting blowout on one side or the other, or you're getting a nice flat bottom. Maybe you have to come in halfway one way, halfway the other. It's something to consider. Hey, think about it. Try it out in its optimum position on your next cuts and see if you notice any difference. Since I brought up my opinion at the beginning of this video, I thought for today's bonus I would do a little self-promotion. I've been writing on the popular woodworking blog for about 3 years now, and one of the articles I'm most proud of, I'll post down below, was talking about hand tools versus power tools for the beginner, and why I think hand tools are probably the way to go to get started out. Even if you're in the public school sector and you're taking a class in wood shop with the idea that you would be leaving high school and going straight to a job. My opinion, and I explain why, is you'd probably be better off learning hand tools. So follow the link below to that article, read it, and maybe in the comments below leave your opinion one way or the other. Should they be teaching power tools to beginners or hand tools?